Sure.
Oh, well, should we introduce each other, even though John just introduced us?
Should we?
This is David Shields. He's the chair of graphic design.
And this is Sasha. Sorry, I've been drinking. Sasha Freyer from the Department of Photo and Film on the second floor of Poly, and third. Second and third floor.
Yeah, we're over in Paul's building.
Yep. Do we go now?
Yeah, we're gonna go.
Forward button. Oh, look at that. So am I asking you about these, or?
Yeah, what would you like to know?
So I looked at your work.
Okay.
And the first time I looked at your work, really. And it was really nice to finally sort of I think of you as a chair. I don't think of you as, I hear you make work.
This is how it happens.
And so then looking at the sort of that body of work, it was really nice to begin to sort of personalize some of those things. And I think the thing that struck me most, just in looking at the short films, was your use of light. That was kind of my immediate, like, oh, I'll have to figure out how to talk to her about light.
So this still that you selected is a still image from a film I made called Burn Out the Day. And it was shot on 16 millimeter film, which is an old analog process. You have a hand cranked camera, send it off to the lab. It's something we still teach in photography and film. Am I allowed to look out at them? Also, will this be edited, or is it just like a one shot?
Talk to the editor.
Okay. So anyway, I should have asked that before. Sorry. So in those, I make documentary films that are longer, and I tend to shoot those digitally. But my personal work is in 16 millimeter. And I like to work with natural light a lot. I generally do not set up lights. I tend to be outdoors or indoors where there's a lot of natural light, because the material of celluloid really captures it beautifully.
I was going to say, is that the reason maybe that I was attracted to that there's like a butteriness about it?
Yes, absolutely.
And also
it's lost a little bit when it's transferred to video, but
right.
but I mean, seeing it projected. Also from Burn Out the Day. So in that film was made from footage that I shot in different places, kind of over a span of time. When I make documentaries, I usually go in with a very specific plan. I spend a lot of time doing research and writing, and I sort of have an idea for what the structure will be and what I need to shoot in advance. But this more personal work, it's more of a kind of gathering and accumulation, and then when I feel like I have enough material, I might start to put it together. I actually don't like to say that in front of students, because it means I'm going in without a plan. I don't really know what it's going to be. How long will it be? How am I thinking about framing it or structuring it? But in this particular instance, one day I had gone down to this very small town in Iowa where I was making a documentary, and I happened to have my 16 millimeter, it was separate. I happened to have my 16 millimeter camera with me, and in this small town, very small town, a town of 700 people, there was this giant house in the middle of town that was like abandoned, and the mayor had bought it for $1 to burn it to the ground as practice session for the volunteer fire department. So I got there, and they had just set this gigantic blue wooden house on fire. So I was like, oh,
right.
I'm going to film this, because when do you ever get to see this? So that was really sort of a happy coincidence. And the footage is kind of odd in the film, because you see some shots of firemen just sort of they're hanging out and waiting for it to burn enough before they start putting out the fire. So there's some shots where the firemen are just sort of standing there watching this house burn, and I'm like, what is going on?
There's one that seems really relaxed in the shot, and it's sort of like, what's going on? But I wonder, like, in hearing you talk about it then, in terms of having a plan or not having a plan, like, I think a lot about the design process and not knowing where you're going to go, or really, like, when we work with our students, really sort of instilling this notion of your first idea is probably great, but your 10th or 20th idea is going to be way better. And so working through not knowing where you're going to get to, and so in hearing you talk about that process, like, not knowing, you have a general idea, you have an intuition or sort of a set of experiences that might guide you, but in not knowing,
right,
how do you begin to know? Like, does the story, do you have any sense of narrative when you start it, or is that literally what happens as you begin to look at you're responding to.
Well, it's so interesting because when I think of design being so much about solving a specific problem, right? Like you have this problem, you think about how you're going to solve it, and yeah, you're going to come up with all of these different ideas and solutions and see which one works. And I think with a film like this, I don't know what the problem is I'm trying to solve until I see the material and start to put some things together. In the case of this film, I actually had all this other footage that I had shot in my house in Iowa, the last place I lived in Iowa, and then also of this homecoming parade. And I sort of was interested in it, and then I didn't really know what to do with it. And then I remembered this burning house, which was stuff I had shot like 3 or 4 years ago that I was excited about, but I never did anything with it. And then I kind of went back and said, oh yeah, the burning house goes with some of these images of childhood and this kind of small town life, and gives it this more sinister quality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was sort of hard to determine, like, is this part of the narrative arc? Is this, like, what's going on? Then there's sort of the moments in the kitchen at the pans. It's like, I was trying to make connections.
Right. No, it's not, I mean, it's a different, it's like, this kind of like experimental fine art filmmaking, it's hard to go into it with like expectations of narrative, which is what we do when we watch films, because that's how most of us watch films that are about stories. And this is more about creating associations through like repetition of shots or through color matches, for example. I mean, there is always a sense of like when you get to the end is sort of the thing that leaves you with the strongest feeling or affect.
Right.
And that informs everything you saw before.
Nice. And I think, I mean, that I'm going to jump around, actually, because that makes me think of this, which I thought was so great. I love Greenaway.
Oh, yeah.
And then I see this, and then you're sort of, it's your homage to his early work. I'm like, oh, how perfect.
Yes. Have you seen this Greenaway film?
I've seen bits of that one.
The early one.
Yeah.
So it's this short Peter Greenaway film in which he was shot in Venice in 1960, and it's the same footage 3 times with different audio. And so I was in Italy, where you've done a lot of your work as well. A great, rich resource for all kinds of art and design, history and experience. So I was actually in Sicily with a group of photography and film and dance students doing summer study abroad, and I had my 16mm film camera with me, and we were staying in this very small town in Noto. And I just was sort of responding to that environment, filming on the streets, but also really conscious of being an outsider in this small town culture and wanting to avoid like the touristy shots. So it wasn't sort of about the grand architecture of Noto, it was really more about this culture of the streets and young people selling these crazy tennis ball yo-yo-like things, and the guys who are out sort of talking with their hands, and the waiters who are by the restaurants trying to drag people in. So
nice.
Yeah.
And also it was like very New Orleans in some way.
Oh.
Maybe the color palette or like,
That's
I'm not
interesting.
sure.
Huh. Yeah.
I don't know. But I forget what I did. Then the strawberries.
Oh yeah, the strawberries.
You love strawberries. I mean, like this was like this was a love shot for me. Like that, it's hard to not, for me to look, and even that whole film. But this particular image was so like there's a lushness there that gets captured.
That's
like,
a lot. That's a 16mm. It's just delicious. You just want to eat it up.
Yeah.
And also, I will say, this is like I'm nerding out a little bit, but in this film in particular, in this film more so than in the other two, because this film is called Our Summer Made Her Light Escape, and I filmed the entire thing in my house and backyard. And it's a lot of pictures of images of my children and their friends, and it's this very kind of domestic. But then it becomes a little creepy because later, at one point, there's this mole that was dying.
That made me sad.
I know. Should I tell? So, John and the girls were planting me a tree for Mother's Day, and they were digging up the dirt in the backyard, and John accidentally killed, moles, they're underground, so he accidentally killed a mole. And this mole came out and was like suffering in its death throes. I mean, it was an accident. It was a total accident. But I was like, oh, again, like a house burning down, that's something I want to film. I was like, oh, this mole with flies buzzing around it and it's kind of twitching, I gotta go get my camera. Like, you guys, this is, you gotta respond to the world when you're making this kind of like personal art. Without the mole, the film would just be sort of like cute kids and a birthday party, and the mole gives it a whole other dimension. But okay, back to my dorky thing I wanted to say, which is that I shot a lot of this film with a very long lens, so it's like a telephoto lens that sort of brings everything in close and flattens the space.
Right.
So that the front of the picture plane and the back of the picture plane appear closer together than they actually are, which also gives it this kind of weird intimacy, like visual intimacy.
Right. And I mean, because then you can be. I mean, I think again there's that correspondence between like reading the image for the content that's there, but also reading it for the way that it's been composed and framed and structured, like those technical things that are all like me as a viewer, I'm oblivious, or I don't have that technical knowledge. So I read them, but on what level is a fairly visually literate person living at the beginning of the 21st century affected by those kinds of things? Like you as a maker.
Well, as a maker, I need like an organizing
That wasn't really a
principle.
question, sorry.
No, but it was. As a maker, like, okay, so I have this footage, like, so what's the organizing principle of how to put it together? And with this film in particular, the organizing principle was color. So it moves, the color palette kind of moves from warm to cool, and then a little bit back to warm again. But it goes from reds and oranges in the beginning towards a more cool palette in the end. And that was deliberate, but that took me a long time to figure out. But you wouldn't, I mean, now that I told you that, and if you watch it again, you might say, oh yeah, I get that. But that's like, you wouldn't necessarily get that as a viewer coming to it, but I don't think you need to.
But it reinforces, however subconsciously, sort of that aspect of starting with fruit and sun and daughters and ending with dead mole.
It doesn't quite end with the dead mole.
Right.
But it comes near the end.
I mean,
it's true.
It's in the cooler part.
It's also there. It's also this surprise. I mean, it's something that's about. I mean, so in that way, I do think this kind of more like experimental film is connected to narrative, because I'm interested in the idea of like the unexpected and this thing that happens. You're like, wait, that didn't seem to go with what came before it.
Right. And I don't. What's the other? There was. Oh, there was. This was all part of the same film.
Yeah, those three are from the same film.
So what? I couldn't quite figure out what was going on here.
With
Like
the
this is a
text?
chat room,
Okay.
or
So this film I made, I gave myself this challenge to film, because I had gone to see a screening by a filmmaker whose work I really admired, and he just worked so much. And my kids were really little then, and I just felt like I wasn't being productive enough. And so I said to myself, I'm going to film every single day for the month of December, like no matter what. So it was really, really cold that December, and it snowed a lot. So I tried to be outside with this natural light as much as I could, but I also did end up filming inside. And then this film is a mix of video and 16 millimeter.
okay.
So some of the material from the television, like this endlessly weird Tinkerbell Disney loop that's like decaying and falling apart, that's on VHS. That's the that was filmed on video. And then there's a lot of text in this film, because I became obsessed with this website called WeFeelFine.org.
Right.
And it's this website that aggregates blog posts. I'm not sure if it still exists, because this film's from 2010, I think. But it aggregates blog posts where people use the word feel or feeling, and then you can search by location and weather and
Which
and
gave the little
gender.
map.
Yeah. So then I did these searches for like women who are 38 and live in Iowa, and which is what I was, or 47 or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, whatever it was. Whatever it was at the time, and then I grabbed some of that text as content.
Nice. And the soundtrack on that is really lovely as well. Like this.
And that's all just like environmental sound and music.
Okay. I think that was all that I had grabbed. Oh, and then this, the...
I'm not, okay.
Right. Which is like it was a little funny for me to look at that work because it's like, I'm looking just above Sasha's left breast.
That's the point.
But
you've seen me wear that to chair meetings,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not wearing it now.
Right.
But I should explain what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so this totally other part of my practice, which is a new project I started. It's like it's a curatorial project. I was at like a fancy VCU Arts alumni event upstairs last spring. It was honoring one of our alumni. And I had one of those plastic, the 3x4 inch plastic badge holder with the magnet. And every time I go to any event, my name is always wrong or the badge is always wrong because I have 2 last names and one of them spelled weird and it never works. So I'm there with my like messed up name badge. And I hate wearing those things anyway. And so I was talking with this student and a couple of other people. We were talking about this stupid name badge. And somehow it just came up like, this would be a great venue for art. Like why,
right.
You're wearing something right here, like why does it have to have your name? And so I had this idea for something called Bust Gallery. So I curate work from other people. I put out a call for entries. I put it on wooloo.org and put it on Facebook and send it out. And I've done this twice. So I did it in the spring of last year. In the fall of this past year and this spring. And each call for entries, I've gotten about 50 entries. And so I know it's kind of a lot.
Wow.
Right? So the work has to be 4x5, 3x4, and fit in a plastic badge. And so so from the 50 entries, I pick 4 artists, 1 work each, and then for 1 month, I wear that piece of art here, like everywhere I go. So for like chair meetings, or normally I actually would be wearing it here, but the artist who I'm featuring this coming month, Shannon Castleman, actually is doing this really cool photo project where the photos are not archivally treated properly and they're going to fade over the course of the day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. So I had this great one last fall too, where it was this jewelry artist had this mirror with a surveillance camera cut out. This Finnish jewelry artist. So it's the work that people submit is cool. But so I'm starting her tomorrow because I wanted to wear my voted sticker today. So I know I'm going on too long. I take like kind of inappropriate bust selfies at like various professional functions, and it makes people like weirded out and uncomfortable, and I like that.
Which I think is great, because I think the written statement. Just and this was actually the first thing I grabbed. And it was like, well, this is all I want to talk about. All the rest is just whatever. Because this is so awesome. The fact that you've simply paid attention to that space, like just that alone, is enough in some ways. Like amazing. Like you've recalibrated that space completely for me. And then the fact that you're sort of consciously approaching it as this subterfuge. So now it's suddenly like chair meetings are way better all of a sudden because there's this thing happening right across the table, and this is way better than the meeting.
And I'll go to artist talks, and then I'll like stand up by the artist, and instead of like taking a picture of the artist, I'm actually just taking a picture of myself with. And it's just like this, like that's all, like my face is never in it, and then like the artist in the background, and I have an Instagram, it's Bust Gallery, and I have a Facebook page, and then I have a website, so I'm constantly posting to all of those, and when I travel and stuff, I do it too. Yeah. And people ask, that's the other thing, is that people ask me, what is that you're wearing? And I say, oh, it's this artist whose name is, so-and-so, and this is their work, and then I say, this is my gallery, Bust Gallery. I also have business cards, so sometimes I give people a card. And they say, but wait, sometimes people will say, where's the gallery? And I say, well, this is it. This is not the advertisement for the gallery. This is the gallery.
Right.
So.
Nice.
I'll be wearing Shannon's thing tomorrow at the chairs meeting at 10 o'clock.
Oh, nice.
Don't forget.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Not to get too dorky or art theory or whatever, but it begins to be sort of, my brain just went blank. Hi.
Hi.
Wow.
Hi.
Just land artist, non-space. Elsner, help me out.
Land artist, non-space.
Not Terrell. Smithson. Thanks.
Oh.
Robert Smithson. So he talks about.
That's so interesting.
Like site and non-site, and suddenly this for me was so much about like collapsing both of those at the same time, but in such like this little intimate space. That would have been way better if I would have just referenced him right off the bat. But thanks, good, awesome. I sound better in post.
Everyone sounds better in post.
Yeah, right. And also, I mean, this notion of like kind of circumventing traditional gallery space and all that, but also just like that it's your life, and integrating it. That it's not this moment where you stop and make work, or that you stop and suddenly work is in a gallery and we sort of look at it in that frame. But it's both physically on you, but you're also documenting it and putting it into social media space. Right. Which I think again collapses that as well. Like where is the space really? Where is the gallery really? Is it me looking at it on my phone?
Right. Is it this like human encounter, or is it? Because it is also about that selfie culture, of like doing the selfies, and then we're constantly in these spaces where we're surveilled. So I talk about that, like the audience is people at these bureaucratic meetings, but the audience is also like, the camera at the ATM. You know what I mean? It's just there in the world because it's, being documented out there. So, should I take over the clicker?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So I had great fun looking at your website and your research. Because I'm a documentary.
Oh yeah, I didn't get to that. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So because I'm a documentary filmmaker, although I looked at the stuff that you gave me on the website, the other thing I like to do is do my own little research. So I trolled your Facebook page. I trolled your wife's Facebook page. I was trying to find a picture of you, like a dorky 12-year-old birthday party, something. And I couldn't find those, but I found this. And I thought it was a really interesting image, and I was looking for a picture of you because although I've known you for 3 years, I also think of you as a chair. And all I know about your background in design, except for what I learned also talking to you in the hall yesterday, I knew you as like the person who came here from the University of Texas at Austin, and I knew that you were involved in the type collection there. But I didn't know about your previous sort of, and that you had gone to Cranbrook for your MFA. Right. Your previous sort of that career, BFA education, MFA education, professional practice into higher education. And I was wondering if you would just tell us about that.
Sure. It's a straight arc.
Yeah.
A to B. This is a great piece. It's not, I wish I could remember the artist. We were in Dublin a few years ago at Trinity College. There's the Science Gallery, which is a really phenomenal space. And this was somebody's work that they were sort of photographing. They had set up a camera where they were capturing every visitor that came in and using all the previous visitors organized by color. They had archived all of the photographs based on color, and then they were pulling from that to put the images back together. So the blue in my shirt is made up of all of the previous visitors that had blue.
That's amazing.
It was like science and art, and I don't remember the group's name that was doing that, but that's where that's from. But yeah, I went to school for graphic design. I started out as an English major and realized that I liked the shape of words more than I liked words, and so that's not actually how it happened. It's just in retrospect, that's what happened. And you'll all come up with great stories on where you ended up and be able to tell that.
With the nuggets.
Yeah. And so I was in printmaking and graphic design. I was doing both because I really liked both the physical making and that process, and also sort of using that as a way of problem solving. And then I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was going to let grad school decide. And so I applied to a bunch of grad schools, and I got into several. But Cranbrook was sort of the most amazing one, but it was in design, not in printmaking. And so I was like, okay, I'll be a designer.
That's it.
And that's it.
That decided your fate. So you went directly from undergrad to grad?
I did, yeah.
Don't tell them.
No, don't do it.
Don't do that.
No.
I always tell students not to do that.
I mean, I spent an extra year in undergrad.
Okay.
No, it's really hard because our grad program does. I keep saying at our grad admissions meetings, like, well, I wouldn't have been on the list because.
Right.
But
it's much more challenging. It's much harder, I think. I mean, just to do a lot of things.
I'm of two minds of that. Yeah.
Sense of your own practice.
Yeah.
But you must have had a
being
very
in the
developed
world.
sense of your practice.
I guess. I got lucky. I was really lucky in all of that. And I think if I were going to follow my mental advice, I would have stayed out a couple of years and then gone back. But I think following my gut, I had this great opportunity to be at that place at a particular time with some amazing people that have stayed really influential in my life since then. And I wouldn't, other things great, I'm sure would have happened. But I got really lucky. And then I left grad school, and I wrecked my car about 2 months before.
This exciting
my
stuff.
girlfriend, wife, and I went down into Detroit to see a live show, and we were coming back, and there was a snowstorm, and there was like a 80-car pileup or 40-car pileup, a lot of cars, and it just wiped the car out. And so then it was like, well, where the hell do I go? I'm in Detroit. I'm not going home. What do I do? And Chicago was sort of the closest place that I could get to that I didn't need a car. And that is true. That's not a made-up story. That really is how I got to Chicago.
I don't want to stay in Detroit.
Yeah.
I need to be somewhere where I don't need a car.
Right. And I was too scared to move to New York at that point.
Right.
Plus, that's where my girlfriend was moving back to, and later became my wife. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so I went to Chicago.
So you started in Chicago.
Started working like professionally. I needed to eat. I needed to pay rent. I had this shiny design degree, and so I started working. And at that point, it was early 90s, and so the computer hadn't fundamentally taken over everything. The Netscape browser was a little bit of time away. It hadn't totally taken over either, and so I was basically working in traditional print shop where we were doing. I had a boss that did it very traditionally and marked everything up by hand, and we separated out the films and we went on press checks, and I'm like the last generation that got that.
I know about this because my dad's a graphic designer,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I remember going up being on press. But this is a really interesting. So since you had sort of finished your formal education and training before that transition, how did you make that transition in terms of keeping yourself up to date with trends in design, but with technology, with all of the new tools that were coming out? Because I think this is something for the students in particular, it's something that we all now have to do always, all the time,
Right.
now, forever.
At the time it felt really wrong. It felt like I missed something, or holy crap, the world is changing really fast. Like, I don't think it's ever done this before. Like, none of the people that I were working with that were older were so worried about it. They were kind of, like, we're getting along fine. There's that light at the end of the tunnel.
They thought it wasn't going to change.
They didn't think it was going to change.
Yeah.
And you could tell it was all going to be radically different, but not knowing how it was going to be radically different, and not knowing exactly what you were going to need to do. So it was, I think most of it was just, I got hungry a lot, and I like to eat, and I like to drink, and so I had to make sure that the money kept coming in. And you just sort of figure out, literally making it up as you go along. And at that point, it was this sort of lovely period where nobody else was an expert at it yet.
Yeah.
So you could do these things that were really bad in hindsight, but nobody else knew what was going on either. Right. And so you could kind of get away with it for a while. Right. And I think in some ways the discipline has kind of shaken itself out on a certain level, and on another level, it's just become all the more pervasive. Where we've really changed our curriculum so that we stress very much living in ambivalence, working in ambivalence, so that the students, rather than thinking they know the answers, or thinking that any of the things that they're doing are going to be something that they're doing for more than a couple of years,
right.
They realize like all of this is going to change, and all of this is going to change quickly, and so it in some ways has made the job easier. We can talk about these core concepts now, because those are these sort of main ideas of design stay consistent.
Sure.
Right? How we make things, or what we think about when we make things, has stayed unbelievably stable, but the tools that we use to do that radically change. And so it's interesting also in that the faculty are also having to play catch up as well. Sure. In a way. And so I think the students see that. and not in a bad way, like our
No,
faculty don't know anything.
we have
It's
to
like
constantly
it's
learn.
modeling good behavior.
You have to learn
Yeah.
how to do this new thing because there's no way you can keep all the new things in your head at once.
No.
It's impossible.
And you can't pack it into a 3-year program.
Right.
Like that's impossible. And so I think that I feel like I'm in a really lucky spot in terms of education and having some control over a curriculum and coming out of the point in time when I came out of where it was such transition, where things were kind of scary and you didn't know what the hell was going to happen, and beginning to kind of integrate that into a design curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing in the sense that when I first started making film, the very first film I made with a friend of mine, and she did most of the shooting and I did the audio. And I did the audio on 7-inch magnetic tape, reel-to-reel, on something called a Nagra. It was incredibly heavy with a big shotgun microphone. And the first time I moved to the DAT, digital audio tape, which is what it was then before we went to completely tapeless, I thought, I don't know, can I do, like, I guess I got to do this. Let's try it. I thought I was going to want to stick with the Nagra, but the machine was so much lighter. It's just like, all right, I'm sure this digital audio tape stuff will work and it should be fine. But yeah, going through all of those technical transitions. Yeah. I want to ask you about your manifesto. So can you read it? It's too small for me to read from here.
The voiceover on the video is way better.
On the website, David has a manifesto about design. And when did you write this manifesto?
Yeah, one weekend.
But I mean, is it something that you've kind of lived with for a long time in your practice, or does it change? Like, do you sometimes look at the manifesto and go, "Oh God, I need a whole new one"?
There's that.
Yeah.
This came after the fact, and all of that work that you saw on our website is the work that I've done in partnership with my wife. We were design partners first. Or we were studio mates first, and then we made a joke about, we should name a studio this. And then we got married, and then we shared an accountant, and the accountant was like, it's not really funny to do these separate things, you should get together. And so we just sort of combined, like we got married and we were living in the same place, or we were living in the same place and then we got married. And then, is that wrong anymore? That's not wrong anymore. Back in my day. My parents, horrified.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was just kind of moving as we went along, and the manifesto was a funny thing where it grew out of this process. We were kind of redeveloping our website, refocusing on what we wanted to be doing with the work. We were living in Austin at the time. It was the two of us, an employee who had been a student that moved into internship and was working with us. And we hired this film crew out of DC to come and film us. We had very specific ideas about what we wanted. This was going to be a video that was going to make us lots of money, because it was going to show like this business model of like using social media and talking to the business world about showing what we were doing. Like, great ideas, right? Like, super awesome.
It is. It's like pre-Kickstarter.
Yeah, and and we felt sort of compelled, like, this is what we need to do. The funny thing is that's not what happened at all. They were really great. It was 3 people that came down. We had an awesome time hanging out with them over several days, shot a ton of footage. And then they kind of went away and they were going to work on it. We're going to splice it together. We've heard everything that you said, and we're going to bring it back to you and show you. And they kind of came back to us earlier than what we expected. And it was like, oh, we have to shoot more. And they were like, no, we did this little thing where we kind of spliced together. We had such a great time listening to you guys and hearing what you were talking about. We made this little film for you. We're still going to work on this other thing, but watch this. And we watched it, and both of us were sort of like, that's way more awesome than anything we could ever do.
Oh, that's great.
This is like, what a bad idea. We totally have to make that thing that we said we were going to make, because that's our commercial practice. We can't screw around with this. We should keep doing this. And this sort of conversation comes out about it, and we kept coming back to what they had made. Mm-hmm. And we loved it so much better. And we realized at that moment that it's sort of where you stop being a designer and you become a client, or you think about in client mind, like what sort of relationship do we want our clients to have with us, which is when they recognize something good, we want them to say that and comply with us and agree with us
and go along with it. And so we realized we had this sort of magical moment where any normal business person would have said, no way, give us the thing we paid for, we want that. But we kind of said, no, let's give ourselves up to this, and we're going to have this. And so the manifesto was sort of this voiceover that grew out of that. Suddenly we were in this really uncomfortable space. We'd made this other short film, or we were kind of nearby when these other people made this short film about us. And the manifesto just grew out of bits and pieces of what we didn't know we wanted to talk about when we made the film, but after seeing it, I think it made a lot of sense. And so this is sort of our notion of what the film meant to us. That was really long.
No, that was good. So it's like sort of seeing your own practice through this external perspective, kind of
which is also happening right now for me as well, because my business partner is in the back, and so she's heard all this, and I made up half of it.
Do you want to rewrite the manifesto?
And then it sort of precipitated this major shift in how we thought about working with clients. And so it was, again, in hindsight, it all makes sense in connection. I don't know if that actually was true.
Yeah.
But it sounds good.
Well, I want to talk about working with clients because, students, they hear graphic design. What is graphic design? Maybe it's a poster, maybe it's a website. Is web design graphic design? Is it this? Is it this? So I actually kind of what I really loved about your site is that it was very easy and clear to sort of see all of the different ways, all the different areas in which, all of the things that kind of fall under this umbrella of graphic design. So we have, and I have slides for all of these, but there's web design, print design. So this is the slide for web design. This is a website. Print design might be business cards, might be posters, other print material. Those are sort of the obvious ones. The ones that were less intuitive for me, maybe for students, were some things like art direction. So how does graphic design interface with art direction, and what does that mean, and how does that process come about in terms of working with a client?
Yeah, I think they're all connected in some way, and really art directions is sort of the non-physical component of design. Like design is a way of ordering information to make it receivable by whoever you want to receive it, and that can mean something like super clear and straightforward and very sort of pedantic, and it can be crazy and messy and sort of convey discombobulation. But all of those in that continuum sort of serve a purpose. And so design, I think, is mostly being able to take those skills and serve a purpose for at least what the client thinks that they want, or that's always a starting point, right? Where they think they want to be. And so our job as designers is to kind of pull back, really break down the questions that the client comes with, put them into a larger cultural context, and then begin to solve for that. And so designers have to be more than just folks that make nice looking things, and that's a really nice, like, all that makeup, and it's such pretty packaging and well shot. But it solves the thing that's nice about this, and this is a project that Jen had worked on in Minneapolis for Aveda, is at that time in the 90s, Aveda was still a freestanding independent company. They were on the forefront of sort of organic, all-natural, holistic things, and they'd started in the 70s. So all through the late 70s and all the 80s and early 90s, like if you wanted to show natural, it was you took cardboard and you wrapped your package, and then there was some twine and there was a twig. And I'm not joking, like that's what it was. Those were the things you got to work with: twine, twigs, cardboard. And that was the semiotic code for recycled all natural. And it didn't have twigs.
There's no twigs.
I
don't see a twig.
There was
it's shiny.
It was made of glass, and it had these sort of soft touch caps on the lids. And so suddenly having this opportunity where you got to work for a client that didn't know what they wanted, but they thought they knew that they didn't want to be what they were anymore. they looked at the landscape and saw like, well, everybody does sort of cardboard and twigs and twine, and that's really boring. And we need something different, but how do you talk about these things? And so the solution was really counterintuitive, but luckily it was a client that kind of went along for the ride, saying like, yeah, that's where we need to go. We can be a luxury brand. We can talk about materials, but we can talk about them in such a way that isn't overtly sort of hippy-dippy anymore, but also isn't completely slick Reagan era, shoulder pads. And it solved those problems. And so part of that design equation was pulling back and sort of seeing it in context, realizing something else needed to happen, and pushing them in a direction that they were a little uncomfortable with in some ways. And now it's the standard. That happened in sort of the mid-90s, and now when we look at that, it's like, oh yeah, that's organic, and so it's the industry needs a shift again, probably. But
get ready for get out the twigs.
Yeah, twig revival.
There's going to be twig nostalgia.
All that twine, it's going to be awesome.
Twine. The other thing I was like unreasonably excited about was the idea of designing icon systems. Like I saw that and I was like, icon system, what does that mean? Then I saw, oh, I get it. Like think about how many times you encounter icon systems, right? They're everywhere. Like, why do the folders on your Mac laptop look the way they do? Why do these look the way they do? Why do, I don't know, the buttons in elevators, is that icon system? Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
they look pushable.
They look that way because they're designed by someone to communicate information to you. So I guess I just have a question about how you approach icon design. Is it just that just like problem solving, like, what do they need in terms of the information they need to communicate, but within this larger context, or?
Yeah, I think the trick with icons is they're so boiled down.
Yeah, I feel like I could never design an icon.
Like those are.
Like, how do you make it new?
Yeah, like you've got about 20 pixels by 20 pixels, and what do you like? That's like that's 400 pixels. Like that's it. And what can you do with that? There's a lot of things you could do with that. But I think the thing with icon making, and it's funny how I'm going to put this back into your lap, but
okay.
It's storytelling. Like it's not about sort of coming up with a set of things that tell you what to do. It's a set of things that, when working together, tell you an overall story about the function or the activity of that thing. And what comes along for the ride is that pushability, or any single moment having a sense of what that might tell you. Mm-hmm. But icons tend not to be able to stand completely on their own outside of a context.
Sure.
They need all of the other icons for us to sort of understand.
And in some ways, if they're functioning properly, they're almost invisible to the user, in the sense that I would think more about icons if I'm on a website or I'm in a space where I'm trying to navigate something and nothing makes sense. Then I'm going, why can't I, why is this button, why is this supposed to mean this, or why is it placed here? Or, but if it's sort of all, properly designed, then there's a kind of flow there.
Right.
I wanted to talk about logo design.
Sure.
I cannot tell you how excited I was. I mean, you don't understand. This is like my favorite company. I'm the only one.
Me, and Joe Biden.
I'm telling you. Saturday, I was on the train, and my train got delayed. I was coming back from New York. The train gets delayed coming back from New York all the time. You just sort of expect it. And this woman, and this is the other thing. The train got delayed for a really long time in Alexandria, and the last stop was in Richmond, or before, like 20 minutes outside of Alexandria, like between Washington, D.C. and Alexandria. There was this, so what happened was that sorry, this is an aside, but everybody who was going to get off in Alexandria just got off the train, and there were like only 3 of us left on the entire train to go to Richmond. So it was me and this woman and this other guy, and this woman was going off. She was complaining so much about Amtrak, and me and this guy were like, no, I'm telling you, Amtrak, they're totally underfunded. They are doing the best they can. Amtrak is great. So tell me about what it was like to work with Amtrak. And design this awesome logo.
It was the fastest logo I ever made.
It's everywhere.
Yes. And it also comes out of I don't know any of you guys remember the old logo, but it was the nickname was the pointless arrow. So it was they had taken an arrow with the little point, and then they'd moved it to the end. So it was supposed to be about bringing things together, but it was really sad. It didn't work. I loved working on the project because I was living in New York at the time, and I was riding the train, and it was just like the future is this. And then kind of I learned all kinds of insidious things about corporate culture because of this. Like
they're huge. I mean,
they are, but them and the post office, man, like the best companies in the world that get you would never know that from anything you hear because the deck is stacked against them so fundamentally that it is the best magic that I can imagine. It's horrible black magic, but this magic that's been pulled off to completely marginalize these two amazing companies that are democratic in the best sense of the word. And so, trains, driving people up and down the rails together in a community was totally awesome. I lost my train of thought.
Did you get like a lifetime pass?
No,
or
man, we
anything?
kept talking about that the whole time. Like, this means we're going to be able to ride high-speed rail anytime between DC and Boston and now.
I know.
And you'd kind of like, we were working in New York, and we often had to go down to DC for meetings. And, you'd sort of like try and have the portfolio or the work like, oh, sorry. Yes, we are designing your logo. Beer? And it never,
no, it
like,
doesn't.
none of it.
The woman behind the counter who serves the beer, she's like, I don't care what's on the hat.
Oh my God, the food car, worst. That's got to fix.
It's gotten better.
Anyway.
It's gotten better.
It has.
It's fine. They've got the hummus and pretzels.
Yeah.
They don't have Bloody Marys. I was complaining about that on Facebook the other day.
But this project, it was there's a large design company called IDEO based in Boston and in San Francisco, and are really an amazing company at the forefront of a lot of really great design thinking. One of the lead designers for that program invented the mouse. You may know that from any time you use a computer, right? And so they had originally contracted with Amtrak to redesign the food car. And that's what it was going to be. And through this process of engagement, they talked themselves into an entire new train system. Like,
that's amazing.
That never happens. Like, they were able to go like, well, you don't just need a new food car. You need the skin around it. You don't just need that, you need better engines. You don't just need that, you need better rails. You don't just need that, you need a whole better system to rethink the entire Northeast corridor. And Amtrak amazingly went along with it. Like the whole thing. They just said yes. The problem was they bought 30-year-old technology from the French, so it wasn't the fastest trains that they could have gotten. But the fact that it was possible for a design company to engage in that way and talk themselves into a larger project. And it went from not only doing so then the conversation was, well, you're going to develop a high-speed rail system between Boston and DC because you own all the rails, and then eventually you'll roll this out to all other places in the country. You're going to have a corridor in the West Coast, you're going to have the triangle in Texas, you're going to have something that's going to take you from Cleveland all the way to Minneapolis. It's like, wow, we really are designing the future. This is the most awesome thing ever. That was in the 90s.
Yeah, it's still the future.
It is.
It's still the future.
Yeah.
The super high speed rail.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a little mindful of time.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about design education, but I kind of feel like you touched on that. So do you want to say something about it, or I was going to skip ahead because I don't want to miss out on wood type. We haven't talked about wood type.
Design education is great.
Yeah. No, you talked about it. You talked about the kind of your students, thinking about ambivalence and thinking about this sort of foundations and fundamentals.
Ambiguity.
Sorry, not ambivalent. Yeah.
We're not
ambiguity.
ambivalent at all.
Okay.
Highly engaged. But I mean, I think that's a major component of design education is that we're not just teaching a craft, although that's part of it. We're teaching a way of being in the world, which sounds a little hippy-dippy. But it's, no slag on any hippies at all, but it's a way of sort of seeing larger systems and being empathetic to the people that are inside those systems. And I think that naturally leads to all sorts of places that you would never expect to do. And the nice thing about empathy is that it's the way, it is the thing that breaks down all the barriers. So I think traditionally design would have been something that said, we're these hero modernists, we're probably working individually, we're solving all the world's problems and we're doling them out and you're going to enjoy the fruits of our labor, which is all just complete bullshit. But it makes a really great story. So what design really is human beings looking at systems that other human beings have made and trying to figure out how to make them better for the people that use those systems. Because we use systems and we hit those moments where you realize the system doesn't work is when it becomes really apparent.
Right.
And so then how do you learn how to fix those things and make them better for the other people that are using them? So that's what design education is for me.
That's awesome. And then your own practice. I took both of these slides. So
really old stuff.
I wasn't sure. I was looking for things that were sort of the most visual.
No, the things are really old. It's new work. It's
Really
the
old things are really old.
Yeah.
So this is one of the sort of kind of unexpected common grounds that David and I found, I think, between our work is our shared interest in outdated analog processes and techniques. I still shoot in 16 millimeters. 16 millimeter is still part of the training for film majors in the film department, film program. And David's own research involves wood type. So tell us about wood type. Why wood type?
Right, wood type.
If a student comes to you and says, I want to learn about wood type, am I going
Yeah.
to get a job with wood type? What are you going to say to them?
Oh, no.
Okay.
That industry's been dead for at least 100 years, at least. Wood type was where type comes from is metal type, right? Little pieces of metal type that was invented by Gutenberg in the 15th century. Individual pieces that could be rearranged modularly on the printing space, and you could print anything in the world. Metal gets really heavy when it gets big. So by about the early 19th century, because of the advent of sort of mass communication, newspapers and posters and sort of general kind of roiling from the Industrial Revolution, they needed to figure out ways of getting messages and making them bigger. And so wood type was sort of the perfect thing. They could take that little metal type and they could make it really big and make it out of wood. And so they could print things that were 20 feet large, billboards and posters and tigers and circuses. And so my interest is, one, just in its bigness. Like it was big, and so it's something like, yeah, big type, I'm totally into that. But also because it is a totally marginalized portion of history, where the historians of typography, this whole 150 years gets counted as other. There's all these other bits in the way we categorize typography. There's the beautiful stuff, and they get very detailed about talking about these sort of 100-year shifts in technology and how that affected this beautiful typography. 50-year shifts, 20-year shifts, and then there's 19th century. That was a big mistake. It was ugly and big and loud and blah. And then we get to the 1950s, and so it intrigued me. Like, well, that sounds cool. Why does everybody hate it? I'll start looking at it. And I had landed at University of Texas at Austin, and it was a tier 1 research institution, and I was coming out of practice, and they were all saying, you need research. And I didn't know what that really meant, and somebody said, well, somebody needs to take care of the American wood type collection that we have here, go to it. And then I was off to the races.
And you give workshops, and and this is something that you continue to...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, there's a whole history to unpack. And I think the thing that I've shifted from is looking at the sort of typographic form and the styles, and that transition over the 100-year period of its history, and now really beginning to look at the other human beings that were actually making this. I'm digging into the business records of who was making it and where they were and where they lived and who they were living with through census records and everything. But it gets back to that empathy thing where this period, because it was the other, never got names attached to it. It was like those ugly types. And so not only breaking that down so that all those types have names and differences, human beings made those things and made choices and made decisions that are actually really pertinent to how we make type today. And so what I'm looking at is figuring out who those people were and trying to retell that story.
And do you, I know we need time for questions, right? But this is my last question. So do you collect wood? Like, do you go out into the world and look for collections of wood type? You know, like, so for example,
Yeah.
I buy 16 millimeter films at thrift stores and estate sales, and now on eBay, just other people's home movies, educational films. You know, I'm very interested in that. Do you? I mean, where do you?
I had an eBay problem.
Where do you find? Did you have a wood type? Is there a wood type on eBay?
Oh, yeah.
But it got
Mecca.
really expensive
It's a
really
wood
quick.
type
Yeah,
mecca.
yeah. When I first started sort of interested in this and looking, you could get a whole collection of type for $50. And so I was buying it. But now it's
People are into
$500 or $1,000.
Because you've been telling them it's not ugly.
Right, yeah.
Go back.
Stupid, I should have bought it all and
You
then.
you should be like, that stuff's terrible. It's
Yeah.
ugly. Why do you want it?
Yep. I have a good friend that's done the same thing. You know, Letraset, rub down type.
Oh, yeah.
So there was a whole other thing in the 70s where you could take type that was on sheets of plastic and rub it down onto paper. And
I
he's in a
love
way
that stuff.
cornered the market. He started researching it, he started looking at it, he started buying it on eBay, and prices have skyrocketed almost single-handedly because of him, because he's trying to find it all. Yep. So
There's a business
don't
model.
tell anybody about your habits and addictions before you can corner the market.
Yeah.
And then tell everyone.
And tell everyone. Do you have questions?
Shelby does.
Hi, Shelby.
Wait, so this is like for you, Sasha, but also it can be for you, David. Sorry. So, photo and graphic design, they're very similar, and they're on like the same building. Is there any kind of movements towards more collaborative work between the two departments? Because I know things have kind of started with one of my classes and kind of pairing with some designers.
Well, we did sort of at the request of photo students who wanted to learn more about graphic design, we did offer an elective that Jennifer taught that was terrific. And so there's that. And I was actually, as we were walking in here, I was thinking, oh, when are we doing that again? You know, like we should, I mean, it's, you know, maybe next spring. So we're definitely thinking about it. I know that the photo students in particular are really interested in sort of adding that. I think even beyond sort of what happens in Pollock, David and I both really strongly agree that at the Art Foundations level, there needs to be more kind of integration and an introduction to visual literacy, let's say, from a design perspective, but for all of the studio arts.
Right.
And we talk about that a lot.
Yeah. And I think there's real correspondence between the way a photographer looks at an image and the way a designer looks at a frame or, you know, an image. And so I think there's all kinds of, it's super smart that they put us in the same building.
I know.
And there totally needs to be more stuff happening. I can imagine all kinds of overlap, but it's I think in general the structure is slow to respond, just because it's things in compartments are way easier to deal with. So there's a messiness when you begin to sort of overlap. But I think that we both like messy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
we like messy
yeah.
old things. So
Yeah, messy old things sound good.
So yeah, I have a question for you, David. I was just wondering, in your research, have you found that any sort of typeface is like holds more historical significance than any other?
The uglier the better.
Really?
Really? That's
No,
because it's like more human. It's more like
yeah. Well, there's these.
handmade,
It's
or-
weird. I think because what happened in the 20th century was a washing away of all of that messiness of the 19th century, and they did an amazingly good job of just getting rid of it. And so I think there's all these really beautiful, ugly typefaces that were developed in the 19th century that have been slow to have any kind of revival because they just don't quite fit anymore. The electric sign was invented in 1890, or first prototypes were built in 1890. That's right about the time that there was a slowing of the wood type industry. And then neon was sort of brought out in 1909, and the Flatiron Building was erected in 1902. So you sort of put those two things together, and it's these very modern, contemporary things that took the place of what wood type was doing. And wood type was really loud, and it was the flash of the internet. It was the catching on fire and spinning around, because in a static way, it had to be big, and it had to, like, what else could we do? It was it was the animated GIF of the 19th century in a static, non-animated sort of way. And it all got thrown away because it didn't fit anymore. You don't use it on the side of a jet plane. You don't use it in an elevator to tell you how to go up and down. It's really inefficient because it was packed with so much visual information. It had to carry all that visual information that we don't, the context does for us now, or function does, a button pushing is, it doesn't have to be very decorative. And so I like them all. There is this really lovely one called the Italian, which is sort of an inverted, all the thicks have been made thin and all the thins have been made thick. It's not Italian at all, but the French called it that because everybody has a culture they demean, and the French demean the Italians and we demean the French. So that same type in English is French, and when you get to France, it's Italian, but they're all lovely.
Question for Sasha. What are some of your favorite or the classic films that inspired you to pursue a career in film?
Ooh. I mean, that is such a big question. I mean, I have favorite classic films that are, classic Hollywood films and narrative fiction films that I love but didn't necessarily inspire my career. I was just singing the praises the other day of a film called Breaking Away from 1979, which I've watched with my children very recently. I mean, that's a great film. It's everything from that to a film like The Earrings of Madame De, which is by Marcelo Fools, which is one of my favorite films of all time. It's by Max O'Fools. His son, Marcelo Fools, is a documentary filmmaker who I'm also very influenced by. Max O'Fools was a French emigre to Hollywood, and he made a lot of Hollywood, what were called kind of B pictures, and his career was revitalized later. In terms of documentary, I'm really interested if people have seen a documentary called American Movie. It's from the 90s. It's a great comic documentary. It sort of introduced comedy into documentary in a way that is so prevalent and resonant within the culture today. We just take it for granted. It was very influenced, I think, by This Is Spinal Tap, which is a fake documentary, mockumentary. You have to see American Movie. American Movie is about these two guys in Milwaukee who are best friends, and one of them is trying to make a feature horror-length film. And it's just about their misadventures making this film. And it's a beautiful film about friendship and community and making weird horror movies. But again, so that influenced me in terms of thinking about like comedy and documentary, because documentary, I think prior to that in some ways was always considered more staid and steady. I really love the films of Werner Herzog. I worked for a filmmaker named Barbara Koppel many years ago. She's the only female director to win the Oscar for Best Documentary twice. So she was a very big influence on me as well.
And Breaking Away is awesome because then you get the disparaging of the French and then the disparaging of the Italians.
Yes, yeah.
All in one movie.
So good. And great, and bicycling, lots of bicycling. It's such a good movie. More questions?
I have a question. I'm curious about the name badge.
Oh, the bust gallery?
Yeah, the bust gallery. What do you see as the difference between, or the similarities between that and like a typical, like someone wearing a pin of like something that they like, or
So if you go to the website, you'll see.
Okay.
Because it's weird. It's weird. It's like not. And sometimes people are like, "What is that a pin, or what is that?" Because it's like it's in plastic,
Yeah.
so it's kind of reflects the light, and it's like this big, and so it kind of like gets people's attention in a different way, and so that's usually when people ask about it, it's sort of like, what is that you're wearing? Because it looks like a name badge, but it also, like, what is it? And I will say that because I loved this entry so much, I took it in December of last year, this sculptor made me this thing called breast pocket sculpture. Do you remember that? It was like this. It was like foam and polyurethane, and it looked like a pocket, and it had all these weird things sticking out of it. So it did like break the frame for that 1 month.
Totally had
But
weird
now
things
it's
sticking out of it.
yeah. It was that one was really like, what is going on here? Sometimes the thing would fall out. Yeah, Dean Scott loves it when I wear those things. She's just like, I don't want to be in that picture. Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question for David. I can't see you, but so as a graphic designer, what do you think about like? I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this question, but like consumerism, I guess, like in a way, like you know how sometimes people like slap a label onto things and it becomes like $1 million more expensive. Like, I don't know. What do you think about that in relation to like?
It makes it better.
Like luxury.
Totally. Yeah, I mean it's sort of how the Western economies work in a fundamental way, which makes me think of the Maoists that were out on campus today. There's an active Maoist party here, and they were anyway. It's like architecture. 90% of the buildings that are built on the planet are not built by architects. Only 10% are, and those tend to be the good ones. Graphic design tends to be a very similar thing, where graphic designers making graphic design are a very small part of what we end up seeing. And so that sort of slapping on superficially, in the end, really isn't design, right? It has all the mannerisms of what we think of as a design object. It's been printed, it's got a shape, it serves some sort of function by increasing the value of the stuff that's inside. But there's sort of a demarcation between problem solving, and I mean, you can do good and bad things with design. And oftentimes it's difficult to make the distinction when it's happening.
I was thinking like Apple, you know, like when a phone is like an Apple product, like a lot of people tend to buy it because it has the Apple logo on it. And so like, did designers design that? Are you saying like it's not?
Well, I mean, I think Apple's a funny thing, right? They're not just putting a sticker on. I think there you would look at more like what Windows was doing in the 90s, which was just putting a sticker to advertise on the tops of their computers. Apple is a funny, different thing where I think their design culture is really, really pervasive. But that design culture is separate from the consumer culture. I think that they're trying to solve to a very particular set of parameters. I think they have a very particular, they look to a very particular set of visual cues from industrial design history that's very functional. But I think that the end is they're trying to make a product that works rather than selling lots of things. I come from a generation where the Apple and Mac were completely marginalized, and so this whole fact
They
that
still
they're
are. I think they. I mean, they're not in our fields. Like in our fields, I actually cannot work on a computer that's not an Apple. I can't. It can't be done.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm like. If I go into the library and I have to look something up, I don't know what the keyboard is. I don't understand it. It's like speaking a foreign language.
Yeah.
But I think there are no apples in the library.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's
no,
still
that's true.
marginalized.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's
Just because they're the highest value corporation on the planet, right? Like those are two different things.
yeah.
Did that answer in any way, right? It's a really hard question I'm trying to ignore. So.
I have a question for you. Can you tell us something more about your recent work?
My very recent work. So right now I'm working on so like I said earlier, I work on both these long form documentary projects that are very research oriented and then my personal projects as well. And sometimes I sort of am often working on both at the same time, but one will come to the foreground, one will go to the background. So I have a personal 16mm film that I'm working on, but it's sort of on the back burner because my main project is a documentary on an American photographer named Gary Winogrand. He was considered the most important photographer of his generation in the 1960s, 1970s. He died in the mid-1980s. He was a photographer who was really at the center of a transition from the predominance of commercial photography that appeared in American publications like Life magazine, Look magazine in the 50s, to photography being considered a fine art. So he was a photographer who really moved from that commercial area to the museums in a huge way and introduced a kind of photography to American audiences. When he died, quite suddenly in 1984, he left behind 1/3 images that no one had seen, that he hadn't seen, that were either undeveloped rolls of film or that he had developed but they had never been made into contact sheets. So it's taken that long for there to be a sort of reassessment of his legacy and his body of work. He was also sort of kind of forgotten, like he was really big and then he sort of died and was forgotten, and his later work was considered not so great, but now there's been a reassessment of him. So he's a photographer who I fell in love with when I was a junior in college. There was a major retrospective of his work at the Museum of Modern Art that I went to go see. This was after he was dead. And he was still an important part of photography education then. Now I think even if you asked our photography majors now, probably like half of them would know him, right? Maybe. I don't know if everyone would know Gary Winogrand. They will though. So he was this artist I fell in love with, and then I had all his books, and then the rest of the culture, I stopped thinking about him for about 30 years, and then, or not quite that long, and then there's been this renewed attention to his work. There was a show that opened at San Francisco MoMA and went to the Metropolitan Museum and the National Gallery, and through that sort of the publicity around that, I sort of remembered like, oh, Gary Winogrand, he was such an important artist to me when I was in college. Wow, I really, I need to look at those books again and start thinking about him. And I started thinking, this guy is amazing. Like, why isn't there a documentary about him? So I called his gallery, which runs the estate in San Francisco, and I asked them, why isn't there a documentary? And they said, no one's ever asked. I thought, oh, lucky me. Uh-oh, that's the next 5 years of my life. And it really will be, I'm sure, if not more. So I had to write a long proposal and get the support, to get the support of the estate for me to make the film. They've given me permission to use the images. There are also these incredible Super 8 films that he shot in New York in the 1960s that kind of no one has seen. They're amazing. And I discovered audio cassettes of kind of just personal hanging out conversations that a friend of his taped in 1977 in a diner in Austin, Texas. Because he taught at UT Austin for 5 years.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
He did. He left New York for Chicago, then Austin, then he went to LA.
Nice.
So sorry, this answer is getting long, but one thing I want to actually bring it back to is that one of the reasons that the Winogrand estate gave me permission to make this film, one is because through knowing the work really well and doing a lot of research, including going out to the archives in Tucson for a week, the proposal was it was solid, it was well researched. But the other reason I think they gave me permission is because of connections to a community in photography that I developed when I was an undergraduate that I maintained. So one of the people who I interview in the film, who actually, this interview was totally profound, was my photography professor, my junior or senior year when I was in college, and his connections also kind of helped me be able to interview other people. Todd Papageorge, who was the chair of photography at Yale for decades, who was a very good friend of Gary Winogrand's. My professor Tom was also a good friend of Gary Winogrand's. So part of that was making those connections through relationships that I forged when I was an undergrad.
Which is a great moral to the story.
Yes, that's how I wanted to wrap it up to that, yeah.
Although I would add one other thing, is you find a big ass archive that nobody else has looked at.
Oh yeah.
And then you get to talk about it. So that's
good.
the other thing that connects
That's
us.
good too. Yeah, that part is good too. You find that thing, that other people are seeing pieces of it, and you're seeing pieces of it, and you're seeing the new pieces that other people didn't find, and then also because everyone else who's done research in that archive has either been a curator or a writer, right? So they've been curating work for shows or books or new gallery events, so the gallery can continue to sell work.
But you're a maker.
But so like they don't care about the audio cassettes or the Super 8 films.
Right.
I'm like, there are audio cassettes? What? Like, where are they? Yeah, and they're gold. I mean, the audio cassettes they're the thing. So, it's exciting. Is that a good place to stop? You'll edit this down to like 10 minutes for the internet, right? Please.
Are there any other questions?
Are there
for these
cutaways?
guys?
How are you going to cut away? Are you cutting away? Do we need to do reaction
Slides.
shots? You're getting are you ready to do reaction
Oh my
shots?
god.
So you have a lot to work with?
The question is really where you guys want to be on the green screen. Do you
I
want
want
to be
to
on
be
Mars?
on the beach. I want to be on the beach.
David, where would you like to be?
Well, I'm torn because I just saw some new images they've downloaded from Pluto.
Oh, put
And
us
it's
on
like,
the
there's some high-res, pretty awesome shots of Pluto that could be kind of cool.
Yeah,
right
you
here.
can put us on
We could go like this.
Students, where do you want to put them? Where should they be?
Send them to deep space.
Underwater.
Cold storage.
Underwater. I like underwater.
Underwater.
All right, any other questions?
That was fun.
All right, let's thank these guys.